The Force is old and full of shadows.
The fire is everywhere. It doesn't burn the way fire should. It doesn't consume cloth or skin in an orderly progression. It is the atmosphere, the ground, the air above the volcanic plain of Mustafar replayed in dying memory. But that's not where he is. He knows, somewhere beneath the pain, that he left Mustafar behind, decades ago. What he's burning in now is the superstructure of the second Death Star, and the man holding him is his son. "I've got to save you," Luke says. Not had to. Present tense. Even now, with the suit failing and the lungs failing and everything failing, the boy insists on the present tense. As if salvation is still happening. As if it isn't already complete. He tries to say you already have, but the mask is gone, and the voice modulator is gone, and all that comes out is breath. Warm breath. His own, unfiltered, for the first time in 23 years. Luke's face blurs. The fire doesn't. Then, nothing. The nothing lasts approximately forever. Then, it ends with the sound of artillery. He comes back into his body the way a drowning man surfaces, all at once with violence, with the desperate heaving intake of air that the lungs take before the mind has caught up. His knees hit mud. Actual mud. Cold and wet and granular, pressing up through the fabric of a tunic, standard Jedi issue. And that detail lands wrong before anything else does. Because Jedi tunics don't have enough room in them for a life support system, and a life support system is what keeps him. His hands. He looks at his hands. Flesh, both of them. Young, unscarred across the knuckles. The right still fully intact without the mechanical replacement that Dooku hasn't taken yet. The realization doesn't arrive gradually. It detonates. Padmé, alive. The children in her womb unnamed. The Order, standing. Obi-Wan, not yet broken on a volcanic riverbank, not yet carved hollow by grief and exile. Ahsoka 14 years old, and not yet carrying the weight of 2 decades of wars he failed to prevent. The suit, not yet fitted to his ruined body. The mask, not yet hissing its first breath onto his face in that Coruscant surgical theater while Palpatine watched with the expression of a man watching an investment mature. The temple. The children. His knees pressed deeper into the mud. The artillery overhead is a separatist tank column, he knows, because he was here before, because he fought this battle at 19 with reckless confidence, and a saber style that got his men killed through overextension. Because he knows exactly what planet this is, and exactly what day it is, and exactly what is about to come down that shuttle ramp in approximately. The repulsor craft descends through the orange artillery haze of Christophsis at dusk. It banks. It settles. The ramp extends. He is aware of Obi-Wan somewhere to his left, of Rex behind him, of the sounds of the 501st holding position along the shield generator perimeter. He is aware that his lightsaber is in his hand, deactivated, and that his hand has stopped working properly because both hands are shaking. The figure at the top of the ramp is small, confident. Her montrals catch the last amber light, and she walks down with the stride of someone who has absolutely no doubt she belongs wherever she's going. 14 years old. The knowledge sits in his chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples move outward until they reach his throat and stop there. "I'm Ahsoka Tano," she says, reaching the bottom of the ramp, eyes finding him with the direct guileless certainty of a child who was raised to meet Jedi Masters without flinching. "I'm your new Padawan learner. Master Yoda sent me. She's waiting for the dismissal." He can see it in the slight brace of her posture. She's been briefed that he might resist, that he doesn't want a student, that she'll need to prove herself. She's already preparing the argument. His lightsaber hits the mud. She blinks. He's moving before he's decided to, crossing the distance between them in 3 steps, and then he's on his knees in front of her, in the mud, in the orange light of a battle he's supposed to be commanding. And his head drops forward, and the sound that comes out of him is not a Jedi Master's sound, not a General's sound, not a Vader sound. It is something older and rawer than any of those. "I'm sorry." The words scrape out of him. "I am so sorry. I will never fail you again." Ahsoka goes completely still. She doesn't reach for her saber. She doesn't step back. She stands with the careful stillness of someone who has encountered something they don't have a category for yet. Processing. Montrals angled slightly forward because they're picking up something her eyes aren't showing her. His Force signature. He knows what it feels like. Knows it from the inside. Grief, but steady. Not the consuming, destructive grief of the dark side. Not fear wearing grief's face. Just the weight of a man who has carried loss for 20 years and set it down at her feet. She feels it. He can tell by the way her breath catches. She doesn't understand it. But she trusts it. A gloved hand appears on his shoulder. Obi-Wan. The grip is careful, the way you'd grip a man you weren't sure would hold together. Anakin, quiet, controlled, the careful neutrality of a man filing something away to examine later, in private, with significant alarm. Rex, beside him, says nothing. Rex never says nothing. Rex always has something tactical to offer. The silence radiating from the captain is its own data point. He gets to his feet. The shaking in his hands has stopped. Something has settled into place behind his eyes. Not calm exactly, not peace exactly, but the particular quality of stillness that comes from having made a decision so fundamental that it requires no maintenance. The kind of stillness Palpatine never managed to engineer out of him the first time. Because the first time he hadn't known what he was choosing between. He knows now. He looks at Ahsoka. She's looking back at him with an expression that is 1 part bewilderment, 2 parts the careful evaluation of someone cataloging everything for later analysis. She's going to be brilliant, he thinks, with the particular ache of a man who already knows exactly how brilliant she becomes. Snips, he says. She blinks. What? The name just arrived. It arrived the same way everything else has, already earned, already right, pulled from a future she hasn't lived yet, and a past he can't forget. He holds it a moment. Then he turns to Rex, and his voice is completely level, completely quiet, stripped of every ounce of the brash confidence 19-year-old Anakin Skywalker had used as armor. Get her to cover. Now, Rex moves. Instantly, without the half-second processing delay that a general's tone usually required, something in the delivery bypassed that entirely. Ahsoka glances between them, opens her mouth to object that she doesn't need to be gotten to cover, that she's a trained Padawan, that, not a debate, he says, still not looking at her, eyes already tracking the tank column's adjusted trajectory along the eastern approach. Rex knows where. Go. A beat. Then her boots hit the mud at a run, following Rex toward the shield generator's secondary position, and she glances back once, just once, with an expression he can't quite read from this angle. He doesn't need to read it. He knows what it becomes. Obi-Wan steps to his side, doesn't speak for a long moment, watching the same tank column, watching the same artillery bloom against the dusk. That, Obi-Wan says finally, carefully, was not like you. He picks his lightsaber up from the mud, thumbs the ignition. Blue light, clean and steady, no flicker. No, he agrees. It wasn't. He walks toward the battle line. Behind him, Obi-Wan watches him go with an expression that, had anyone been watching Obi-Wan instead of the battle, might have been the beginning of understanding that something has changed in the fundamental nature of his former student, changed at a level that tactics and psychology and Jedi training have no ready framework for. The artillery keeps falling. The shields hold. The tank column is 6 units wide. He knows this because he counted them from the shield generator's eastern approach before Rex had finished relaying Ahsoka to secondary cover. 6 armored assault tanks. The Separatists' standard Christophsis configuration, their heavy cannons cycling through a sustained suppression pattern designed to collapse the shield emitter by attrition rather than single-strike detonation. Methodical, patient, the kind of siege strategy that wins wars on a long timeline and loses them the moment someone removes the assumption that the enemy will stay behind their own line. He doesn't stay behind the line. He steps through it. There's no announcement, no war cry, no flourish with the blade the way 19-year-old Anakin Skywalker would have opened with. That version of this fight would have been noise and aggression, and the kind of improvisation that occasionally bordered on genius, and more often bordered on recklessness. This is something else. He moves through the smoke at a walk that isn't cautious and isn't aggressive, that simply covers ground at the most efficient rate a human body can manage, without transitioning to a run. And the first B-1 battle droid that turns and raises its blaster doesn't register as a threat so much as an obstacle between him and the tanks. The bolt comes in low. He redirects it without looking. The droid falls. He keeps walking. Two more emerge from the smoke on his left, flanking angle, the standard B-1 contact protocol he's seen 10,000 times. His left hand comes up in a short, almost conversational gesture, and both droids leave the ground and collide with each other mid-air. The crunch of their chassis is flat and businesslike. He doesn't watch them fall. The first tank is 40 meters ahead. Rex's voice comes through the comm general. "What in the... Sir? You're inside their perimeter." "I know." "Sir?" "Our position holds. Keep the Padawan back." A pause. Rex processing the word Padawan applied to the girl he's just met. Processing the order. Processing the particular quality of his general's voice that makes argument feel structurally unsound. "Yes, sir." The first tank's cannon swings toward him. He can feel the targeting system lock through the force the way you feel a change in air pressure, a fraction of a second of warning that the body registers before the mind does. He steps left. The shot tears through the space where his right shoulder was and cooks a furrow 6 inches deep into the duracrete behind him. He reaches the tank. The force comes up under it. Not a dramatic effort. Not the visible strain of pushing against resistance. Just the same calm extension as breathing out, and the tank tilts 15 degrees off its drive axis. The cannon depresses into the ground. He drives his saber through the armor plating above the drive engine in 2 deliberate cuts. The blade carving with the particular care of a man who has done this before, who knows exactly where the power coupling runs. The tank goes dark. The second tank has repositioned while he worked, drawing a bead on his back from 30 meters. He feels this too. He steps aside and sends the deactivated hulk of the first tank sideways into the second's cannon barrel in a single controlled push. The impact jams the turret mechanism. He's already moving toward the third. Behind him, through the comm channel, he can hear the 501st at the shield emitter, their fire patterns shifting, the suppression pressure lifting as 2 of the 6 tanks go silent. Rex is reorganizing the line without being told, reading the battle's changing shape with the instinctive tactical literacy that makes him the finest clone commander in the Republic. He hears Rex quietly redirecting squads, reallocating fire zones, his voice carrying the steady competence of a man who doesn't need to understand what his general is doing to trust the output of it. He knows, distantly, that he should feel something about Rex. About what's in Rex's head. The chip. He files it away. Later there's a sequence to this, and the sequence matters. The third tank's commander has opened the top hatch, a tactical droid, he notes, which means this column has a more organized command structure than standard B-1 deployment would suggest. The tactical droid is processing his approach with the rapid calculation of a machine that is still, fundamentally, running a probability model that doesn't include the variable it's currently observing. It raises a sidearm. He looks at it for a moment. Then he pulls the sidearm from its hand with a small, almost gentle gesture and sets it down in midair, and lets it fall into the dirt. "Retreat," he says. "Tell your command structure the shield holds. Tell them the column is lost." The tactical droid processes this for 0.3 seconds. This unit does not accept surrender conditions from. He puts his blade through the tank's cannon barrel. A precise cut, 2 feet from the muzzle, that renders it non-functional without detonating the energy cell. He looks at the tactical droid again. It retreats into the tank. The hatch closes. The third tank begins a slow reversal. He turns to 4, 5, and 6. Obi-Wan watches from the shield emitter's observation point. He has watched Anakin fight for 11 years. He was there the first time Anakin held a training saber, a 9-year-old boy whose raw connection to the Force had been so overwhelming that the Temple's initial assessment protocols had simply run out of benchmarks and stopped. He was there at Geonosis, where Anakin had thrown himself at Count Dooku with the ferocity and the poor judgment of someone who had something to prove. He has watched him grow into a general, Watch the recklessness acquire context, the aggression acquire technique, the instinct acquire strategy. He knows how Anakin Skywalker fights. This is not how Anakin Skywalker fights. The blade doesn't arc and spin. It doesn't search for the dramatic opening or the disarming flourish. It moves in short, flat lines, each one going exactly where it needs to go, and stopping when it arrives. There's no sound from it that there doesn't need to be. When Anakin deflects a blaster bolt, the saber meets it at an angle that requires the smallest possible movement of the wrist, and the deflection is quiet. A soft redirect rather than the ringing clash of a duelist embracing contact. He's counting the efficiency differential in his head, and he doesn't like what the number implies. Because the Anakin he knows is brilliant despite his inefficiency. The excess energy, the extra motion, the emotional current running through the form, these are not bugs in his technique. They are load-bearing features of the way his combat style interacts with the Force. The ferocity is the engine. Remove the ferocity, and you don't get a quieter Anakin, you get a structurally different fighter. What he's watching is not a quieter Anakin. What he's watching is a man who learned this style somewhere else. The 5th tank goes dark. The 6th is reversing. The remaining droids in the column are retreating in the disorganized, self-preserving scatter of units whose command structure has been removed from the equation. Anakin walks back through the smoke. His tunic has a scorch mark along the left shoulder, a near miss he didn't entirely avoid, or chose not to spend the effort avoiding. He deactivates the saber. His face is clear of the particular expression combat usually left on it, that flushed. Half-thrilled heat that Obi-Wan had spent years quietly worrying about, the way Anakin seemed to find battle slightly more tolerable than it ought to be. No heat. No flush. No residue. He looks tired in the deep structural way that has nothing to do with the last 20 minutes. 6 tanks, Obi-Wan says, when he gets close enough. 6, he confirms. Alone. It was faster. Obi-Wan looks at him for a long moment, looks at the scorch mark, looks at the hand that is resting at his side, completely still, in a way that Anakin's hands are almost never completely still. The girl, Obi-Wan says carefully, you called her Snips. Something moves across his face. Too fast to name. She'll earn it, he says. She already has. He walks past, toward the secondary position where Rex is reforming the squad, toward the place where a 14-year-old girl with orange skin and white facial markings and her whole life still intact is waiting, having watched none of the last 15 minutes, because he specifically ensured she wouldn't. Obi-Wan turns and watches him go. The smoke from the tanks drifts through the amber dusk. He files the discrepancy away carefully, the way you'd secure something fragile, something you don't yet know the shape of, in a place where it won't be disturbed until you're ready to look at it directly. He is not ready yet. But he will be. The safe house smells like dust and old circuitry. It's a maintenance sublevel beneath the shield generator complex. Low ceilings and exposed conduit running along every wall, the kind of space that exists in every military installation in the galaxy, and gets used for storage until someone needs it for something more urgent. Rex's men have cleared it and set up portable lighting that casts everything in the flat, utilitarian yellow of a space not designed for habitation. 3 cots. A field table. A comm unit still warm from its last transmission. Ahsoka sits cross-legged on the floor because the cots are occupied by wounded troopers, and she hasn't asked for one and won't. He sits across from her, not at the field table. On the floor, back against the wall at her level, a choice that registers on her face before she can control the register. A small recalibration of whatever category she'd been building for him since the ramp. You're going to teach me Form V, she says. Not a question. An opening position. No, he says. She blinks. That's your form. It was. She waits for him to continue. He doesn't. Immediately, he looks at her with the patient attention of a man who is content to let silence do preliminary work. And she holds the eye contact with the particular stubbornness of a 14-year-old who has decided that blinking first would mean something. She blinks first. What form, then? That depends, he says, on what you're afraid of. The question lands wrong. She straightens slightly. A reflex. The trained Jedi composure pulling rank over the instinctive reaction. Jedi aren't supposed to. I know what we're supposed to be. Quiet, no edge in it, no challenge. Just the flatness of a man who has heard that sentence enough times to have stopped finding it useful. I'm asking what you're actually afraid of. There's a difference. Ahsoka looks at him for a moment with those blue eyes that are already, at 14, doing more processing than they let on. Failing, she says finally. Honest, because something about the way he asked made dishonesty feel like more effort than it was worth. Being sent back. Being told I'm not ready, and never getting the chance to prove otherwise. He nods. Not the encouraging nod of a teacher validating a student's vulnerability, but the nod of a man receiving accurate intelligence. Form Ivy, he says. Ataru. That's where we start. Ataru is for smaller combatants. Masters say it has limitations against multiple opponents. Yes, against tall enemies with longer reach. Yes, it has real limitations, and you'll hit every one of them eventually. He shifts slightly, forearms resting on his knees. But right now what you need is to trust your body. Ataru is built on movement, on the understanding that you don't have to absorb force. You can redirect it by not being where it expected you to be. That's not a style limitation. That's a philosophy. She considers this with the visible processing of someone who is simultaneously evaluating the argument and evaluating the person making it. The masters at the temple said you didn't want a Padawan. I didn't. Why did you? She stops. Rephrases. What changed? The conduit above them ticks with the subtle thermal expansion of cooling metal. Somewhere down the corridor, two troopers are talking in the low, clipped shorthand of men running on 4 hours of sleep and field rations. I understood something, he says, that I should have understood a long time ago. Which is? He looks at her directly. That you were never mine to teach. You were mine to protect long enough to become yourself. Ahsoka goes very still. It is not the stillness of confusion. It is the stillness of someone who has heard a sentence that rearranged something and is waiting to see what the rearranged version feels like before responding. That's not what Padawan training is, she says, carefully. I know what Padawan training is. He stands, and from a pocket produces her lightsaber, the one she'd had holstered when he'd sent her to cover, which Rex had quietly secured when she'd left it in the secondary position during the tank column's retreat. He holds it out to her. Hilt first. It's one master's philosophy imposed on one student's nature, until one of them breaks. I've seen it break the wrong one too many times. She takes the saber. Her grip on it is automatic, comfortable. She's been training with it long enough that the weight of it is muscle memory. You're saying you won't do that. I'm saying I'll teach you what I know, and you'll take what fits and leave what doesn't, and that's not a failure of the training. That's the training working. She looks down at the saber in her hands, then back up at him. Why did you apologize to me? She asks, on the ramp. I've been thinking about it since and I can't. You don't know me. We've never met. Why were you sorry? The question has been sitting between them since Christophsis, and they've both known it. He is quiet for long enough that she thinks he won't answer. Then, because I will know you, and because the man I was before today would not have been good enough. It is not a complete answer. They both know it isn't. But it is true, and she reads the truth of it in the Force the way she read the grief on the ramp, not understanding its source, but recognizing its texture. She stands. Show me Ataru, she says. Rex finds them an hour later in the sublevel's wider maintenance corridor, which has just enough ceiling clearance for what they're doing. She moves through the opening sequence of Ataru form with the raw kinetic talent of someone who has been training since before she could read. The form suits her the way he knew it would. She's fast. She's naturally inclined toward movement over stability. Her mantrals give her a spatial awareness that makes the evasion-first philosophy of Form 4 feel less like a technique and more like formalization of something she already understood intuitively. He's correcting her. Rex stops in the corridor entrance, because the corrections are not what he expected. Not your elbow is wrong or your footwork is off. Not technical adjustments delivered with the authority of a master talking at a student. Instead, what were you thinking just then? And she, breathing hard, considering, that I needed to get past your guard. And I was thinking about whether it was working, whether you were going to block it. That's the problem. He demonstrates the same sequence, the same approach, but something in his center of gravity is different. Something resolved and present that her version was missing. Ataru doesn't work if you're watching yourself do it. It works when you're only watching the space. She tries again. The difference is immediate and visible, not perfection, but the first real iteration of what the form is supposed to feel like. Better, he says. Rex watches him watch her, and something in the watching is the thing that stops Rex in the doorway. It's not a general watching a subordinate. It's not even quite a master watching a student. The particular evaluative quality that Jedi teachers tend to carry, the continuous implicit measurement against some standard. It's closer to the way Rex has seen men look at things they nearly lost. "Sir," he says from the doorway. He looks up. Something closes off in his expression, not unfriendly but private. Whatever was visible when he thought no one was watching has stepped back behind the operational face. "Rex, Command wants a debrief on the tank column." Apparently the tactical droids filed an anomalous retreat report. Rex pauses. It flagged some interest at Separatist High Command. Good. He picks up his own saber from the wall where he'd set it. Let them be interested. Ahsoka looks between them with the expression of someone who has just realized she's operating at incomplete information and is already cataloging the gaps. "Should I come?" she asks. "No," he says. Then, before she can process this as dismissal, finish the sequence. The last 3 movements. Don't think about whether they're working. She looks at him a moment. Then she turns back to the corridor and settles into her stance, saber coming up, and begins. He and Rex move down the corridor toward the comm room, and he doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. He can feel her in the force behind him, that particular signature, warm and fierce and stubbornly alive, the one he spent 20 years not knowing how to find. It is exactly where it should be. Coruscant from above looks like a living thing. The city planet breathes in the particular rhythm of a trillion lives compressed into a single surface, the light traffic patterns shifting with the hour, the Senate District's illuminated dome catching the last refracted glow of a sun that never quite reaches street level anymore. From the viewport of the Venator-class cruiser descending through the upper atmosphere, it is almost beautiful. The kind of beauty that requires distance to sustain itself. He stands at the viewport and does not find it beautiful. He finds it legible. Every district, every power corridor, every subterranean maintenance route he'd used in a past life to move without being tracked, all of it sits in his memory with the flat, utilitarian clarity of a map he's consulted 10,000 times. The Senate Building, the Jedi Temple, the Republic Executive Building, where a man who is not what he appears to be is sitting in an office doing calculations that have, until today, been proceeding exactly according to plan. Ahsoka appears at his shoulder. She's been doing this for 3 days, materializing in his peripheral vision with the casual territorial confidence of someone who has decided proximity is her right and is waiting to be told otherwise. He hasn't told her otherwise. "You've been staring at that viewport for 40 minutes, she says. "I know, that's not normal." No. She considers him from the side, montrals tilted at the angle he's starting to recognize as active processing, rather than passive observation. "What are you looking at?" "Everything that needs fixing," he says, and means it so precisely that it functions as a non-answer. She accepts this with the particular patience of someone who has decided that incomplete answers from him are still more informative than complete answers from most other people. It is, he thinks, one of the things that will make her extraordinary, the willingness to sit with partial information and not collapse it prematurely into false certainty. He learned that from her. Eventually. Too late. Not this time. Palpatine's office smells of old wood and something underneath it that has no name. He has been in this office hundreds of times. As Anakin, as Vader, as the Chancellor's confidant and student and weapon, he knows every surface in it, knows where the hidden compartments are, knows the precise angle of the afternoon light through the curved viewport that Palpatine always arranged his meetings to coincide with, so he sat slightly backlit and slightly harder to read. He sits across the desk and keeps his face completely neutral. "My dear boy," Palpatine says. The warmth in it is a precision instrument. He knows this now in the way he didn't know it at 19 can feel, beneath the grandfatherly register, the active calculation running underneath, the constant subtle pressure of a man who has spent decades learning exactly which frequency of affection produces the most reliable response in Anakin Skywalker. He lets none of the recognition show. Chancellor, he inclines his head at the measured angle of respect that implies neither warmth nor distance. "You wanted to see me. I always want to see you." Palpatine folds his hands on the desk with the practiced ease of a man comfortable with his own authority. The Christophsis engagement. Quite remarkable. 6 tanks, alone, in under, the shield held. The objective was achieved. A brief pause, barely perceptible. Palpatine's eyes move across his face with the subtle, continuous scan of a man who has built his entire empire on reading people, and something in the scan catches and doesn't immediately release. "Yes," Palpatine says. "It did." The afternoon light comes in at its calculated angle. He sits in it without adjusting. "The Council tells me you've taken the Tano girl as your Padawan," Palpatine continues. The warmth remains in his voice. The calculation underneath it shifts slightly, the way a chess player's posture shifts when the board changes. "I confess I expected more resistance from you on that front." "She's talented," he says. "Exceptional, actually." Palpatine's smile carries the right amount of paternal pleasure. "I'm glad. She'll be good for you, I think." A student requires investment. Emotional investment. There it is. Not a move yet. A preparation. The groundwork of a foundation he intends to build on across years. The careful, patient engineering of an attachment that can be weaponized. Cultivated like a plant in controlled conditions, so that when the time comes to threaten it, the threat lands precisely where the wound is deepest. He looks at Palpatine across the desk. He lets himself see what 19-year-old Anakin Skywalker never saw. The architecture of the man. The decades of practiced warmth sitting over something ancient, and cold, and utterly patient. The way every question is a probe. The way every expression of care is a calibration. He spent 22 years not seeing it. Then he spent 22 more years being it. "She will be," he agrees pleasantly. "I find I'm looking forward to it." Palpatine tilts his head. The scan runs again. Slightly more thorough this time. "You seem different, my boy." Since Christophsis. Battle has a way of clarifying things. Indeed it does. The warmth persists. The calculation underneath it is running faster now, subtle as a current beneath still water, invisible unless you know exactly where to look. "You seem settled. There's a quality to you today that I don't think I've encountered before." He considers his response for the length of time that implies natural reflection rather than careful choice. "I know what I'm doing," he says. "For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I'm doing." Palpatine smiles. It reaches his eyes with technical perfection. "Then Coruscant is fortunate to have you back," he says. The corridor outside is Senate-grade marble and indirect lighting. He walks through it at a pace that doesn't communicate urgency in any direction. His hands are at his sides. His breathing is even. He waits until the third intersection, the one the security coverage has a 4-second gap on, which he knows, because he installed the coverage system in a different life, and then he stops and stands against the wall and lets out a long, controlled breath. Palpatine doesn't know. Not yet. What he does know is that the Anakin Skywalker who sat across his desk today did not respond to a single one of the frequencies he was transmitting. The affection probe, nothing. The student pride activation, nothing. The first careful thread of the attachment manipulation, absorbed without purchase. He will run diagnostics on this. He will probe again, differently, at the next meeting. He will not stop. He knows that. He has no illusions about what the next months require. Palpatine is not an enemy who is neutralized by a single unproductive meeting. He is an enemy who simply recalibrates, who has the patience of a man who has been playing this particular game for decades and has never yet encountered a board state he couldn't eventually solve. Until now. He pushes off the wall and keeps walking. Because what Palpatine cannot account for, what his diagnostics will keep failing to resolve, is not a technique or a discipline or a trained resistance. It's simpler and harder to model than any of those things. He is a man who has already lost everything that Palpatine could threaten him with. He has already lived through the worst version. He has already worn the mask and carried the title and stood in the throne room while the galaxy burned. He has already failed Padmé and failed Ahsoka and failed every child in the Jedi Temple. He has already been the weapon pointed at everything he loved. And he came back anyway. Fear of loss is what Palpatine needs. Desperate, secret, consuming fear of loss. The kind that lives in the chest like a parasite and tells you that the only way to protect the people you love is to do unconscionable things, quickly, before someone takes them. He does not have that fear anymore. What he has instead is the steady, structural knowledge of a man who has already survived the unsurvivable and understands, in his bones, that love held loosely does not diminish. It is the only version that lasts. Palpatine has no instrument calibrated for that. The Senate corridor stretches ahead of him, marble and light. He walks through it, unhurried, toward the speeder that will take him back to the temple, back to the maintenance sublevel where a 14-year-old is working through Ataru sequences with the focused intensity of someone who has decided that not being ready is a temporary condition she intends to end as soon as physically possible. The thought arrives in his chest like something warming. He doesn't analyze it. He lets it stay. He finds Barriss Offee in the temple's eastern meditation garden at the hour before dawn. She doesn't hear him coming. Most people don't, anymore. The 501st has noticed it. Rex has noted it in a report he'll never file, and Obi-Wan has mentioned it twice, in the oblique way Obi-Wan mentions things he's still constructing a framework for. He moves through spaces now the way Vader learned to move through spaces, with the particular economy of a man who stopped needing to announce himself a long time ago. The garden is small, ornamental rather than wild, the kind of cultivated stillness the temple architects believed would encourage meditation. Stone paths, low-growing things with silver leaves that catch what little ambient light filters down through Coruscant's perpetual atmospheric haze. A fountain that produces sound without spectacle, water moving over shaped rock in a pattern just irregular enough to occupy the listening mind without demanding it. Barriss sits at the fountain's edge with her back to him and her hands in her lap, and the posture of someone who came here to be alone with something heavy. He knows that posture. He has worn it himself, in a different life, in different gardens, carrying different weight. He recognizes it the way you recognize a dialect you once spoke fluently. He sits beside her. She startles, controlled, a Jedi reflex pulling the surprise back before it fully surfaces, but the half-second of it is real. She looks at him with the careful, evaluative composure of a Mirialan who was raised to present stillness as a default register. "General Skywalker," she says. "Barriss," he looks at the fountain. "You're here early. I could say the same. You could." The water moves over the stone. In the middle distance, somewhere in the temple's upper levels, a training bell sounds the pre-dawn sequence, the signal that the first morning forms class is 45 minutes away. "How long have you been unhappy?" he asks. The stillness she produces is different from the one she arrived with. This one has more structure to it, the deliberate quality of a response being assembled behind a careful face. "I don't know what you. I'm not asking for a report," he says, still looking at the fountain. "I'm not going to take it to the council. I'm asking because I need to understand something, and I think you're the only person in this temple who can tell me accurately." She is quiet. The training bell fades. "The war," she says finally. Careful, feeling the edges of the admission before committing to it. "What we're doing here. What we're becoming. Go on." A pause. Then, because something about the quality of his listening seems to make dishonesty feel structurally expensive, "We're generals. General Skywalker. We didn't train to be generals. We trained to be peacekeepers. Guardians. We trained for a version of the Force that had nothing to do with which battalion holds which ridge by nightfall." She stops. "That's not a complaint. I understand the necessity. I just..." Another stop. "Longer. I don't know what we're training the next generation for anymore. Whether we're preparing them for the galaxy that existed, or the one that does? He turns and looks at her directly. She holds the eye contact with the composure of someone who has said something true in front of someone with authority over them and is waiting to learn what that costs. "That's not wrong," he says. She blinks. "Didn't expect that." "The Order has a structural problem," he continues, with the flat precision of a man reading from a document he's already memorized. "It takes children away from their families and teaches them that love is a liability. It places them inside a war it didn't design them for, and measures their performance by standards that predate that war by 1,000 years. It does all of this with absolute sincerity and no self-awareness, and the people inside it who notice the contradiction are given no legitimate outlet for that observation." Barriss stares at him. "Which means," he says, "that the only options available to someone in your position are silence, departure, or something worse." The fountain moves. A silver-leafed branch stirs in a ventilation current from somewhere below. "Why are you telling me this?" she asks. "Because in approximately 2 years," he says, and does not look away. "The weight of that contradiction is going to become unbearable for you, and the choice you make when it does will define everything that comes after." She is very still now. The composure is intact, but something behind it has shifted. She is processing not just the words but the impossible precision of them, the specific weight of approximately 2 years. The way he speaks about a future he should have no access to with the flat certainty of first-hand knowledge. "You can't know that," she says. "No," he agrees. "I can't." He lets that sit for a moment and then, "I'm not here to tell you what to choose. I'm here to tell you that there's a path where you take that unbearable weight and you build something with it. Something that actually changes the thing you're angry at, instead of destroying it and everyone near it." The words land in the space between them, and he watches them land. Barriss looks at the fountain for a long time. When she speaks again, her voice has lost the careful diplomatic register and found something younger underneath it. "I don't know how to do that." "I know." He stands, and the movement is unhurried. A man with no argument left to make, because he's already made it. "That's why I'm going to introduce you to Senator Amidala." Padmé receives them in her Coruscant apartment at the 7th hour. She is already dressed, already working. Datapads spread across the low table in the sitting room in the organized chaos of a legislator who has been awake for 2 hours and produced more in that time than most people produce in a day. She looks up when he enters, and the look she gives him carries 3 or 4 things simultaneously in the particular economy of expression that he has spent years learning to read. He reads them all. He always could. "Senator Amidala," he says. "This is Jedi Padawan Barriss Offee. She has thoughts about systemic military ethics and Republic legislative reform that I think you'll find worth your time." Padmé looks at Barriss. Barriss looks at Padmé. He steps back. This is the thing he learned, eventually, that took him too long to learn. Some introductions are the work, and everything after them belongs to the people being introduced. Padmé does not need him to facilitate this conversation. She needs the conversation. He watches Padmé set down her datapad and gesture to the chair across from her with the focused attention of a woman who has just recognized that someone in front of her has something real to say. He excuses himself quietly and goes to stand at the apartment's wide viewport. Coruscant again. Different angle. The Senate dome from the side. The morning light starting to differentiate the upper and lower atmosphere into something almost distinguishable as day. He stands there and listens, without listening, to the sound of Padmé asking Barriss the first real question. Not what do you think, but what have you seen? The distinction that separates politicians who want validation from the ones who want information. Behind him, the conversation begins to build. Barriss's voice loses its constructed composure by degrees. The anger underneath it is real and specific, and detailed in exactly the way that genuine systemic critique is detailed. Not dramatic, not abstracted into principle, but full of particular incidents and particular failures, and particular moments where the gap between what the Order said it was and what it did became impossible to look past. Padmé is taking notes. He thinks about the bombing that will not happen, the trial that will not happen, the walking away that will still happen, but differently, not driven by wound, not propelled by the particular desperation of someone who has been failed publicly and has nowhere left to stand, but chosen, deliberately, from a position of being seen and heard, and given somewhere else to put the weight. That is the difference. He cannot fix the order from inside it. Not entirely. Not yet. But he can redirect the energy of the people it's failing, give it a channel that builds instead of detonates. The fountain in the garden is very far away now. He keeps watching the city wake up below him, level by level, light finding its way down through layers of infrastructure to places it was never quite designed to reach. It gets there anyway. It always gets there eventually. Fives finds him first. This is not an accident. He has been making himself findable to Fives for 3 weeks. Present in the 501st's lower barracks at the hours Fives tends to move through them, visible in the training yards when Fives runs his solo drills, available in the small deliberate ways that don't announce themselves as availability. He has learned, in a life spent commanding clone troopers, that the ones who carry something that needs saying will say it when they believe the saying won't cost them more than the carrying. Fives is carrying something that has already cost him more than he knows. He's in the equipment bay when it happens, running a calibration check on his own saber that doesn't need running. The kind of task that occupies hands while a mind waits. Fives enters, clocks him, starts to redirect, and then doesn't. Stops in the middle of the bay with his helmet under one arm and the look of a man who has been rehearsing an opening line and just decided all the versions of it are wrong. "Sir," Fives says. "ARC Trooper." He doesn't look up from the calibration. What is it? Not a question. A door opened from the inside. Fives is quiet for long enough that the calibration tool makes 3 full cycles. "Then, I need to ask you something, General, off the record." "There's no record," he says. "Equipment bay. No active comms." He checks. He already checked 40 minutes ago before he started the calibration that doesn't need running. "Ask." Fives's jaw sets with the particular resolution of a man stepping off a ledge he's been standing on for too long. "The chips," he says. "The inhibitor chips." "I've been looking into them, sir. In the regs, it says behavioral modification, but that's not. It's not what they do. I've been running scans, talking to medics off base. The architecture of the things is not behavioral modification." He sets down the calibration tool, looks at Fives directly for the first time since the conversation started. Fives holds the eye contact with the braced posture of someone who has decided the worst possible outcome of this conversation is still better than another day of carrying it alone. "I know," he says. The 2 words land in the bay like something physical. Fives stares at him. "Sir, I know what they are. I know what they do. I know who put them there, and I know what they're waiting for." He stands, and his voice stays at the level of a man reporting facts, because the facts are what Fives needs right now, not the register that Fives would have to manage on top of the information. "You're not wrong. You're not paranoid. You're not malfunctioning. You found the thing they didn't want found, and you found it accurately." Fives is very still. Something in his face has gone through 3 stages of expression simultaneously: vindication and horror, and the specific devastation of a man who was hoping he was wrong. "The whole army," Fives says. "Quiet. All of us. All of you." A long silence. The equipment around them ticks with the ambient thermal cycling of a room that exists in artificial atmosphere. "What do we do?" Fives asks. Rex takes longer. Not because he doesn't notice. Rex notices everything, catalogs everything, runs everything through the systematic tactical analysis that makes him the finest field commander in the Grand Army. He notices the meetings with Fives. He notices the pattern of his general's availability in the lower barracks. He notices the particular quality of his general's attention when it lands on the clones versus when it lands on Republic brass, the difference in depth. He waits, observes, builds his assessment with the patient rigor of a soldier who has learned that acting on incomplete information is how you lose good men. He comes to him at the end of the 3rd week, in the corridor outside the briefing room, alone, and states it with characteristic directness. "You already knew," Rex says, "about the chips. Before Fives told you. Yes. Rex absorbs this the way he absorbs most things, completely, without visible disruption, integrating it into the existing model. How long? Long enough. Sir. A pause. Not hesitation. Rex doesn't hesitate. He allocates. With respect. How? He looks at Rex for a moment. The answer to that question is the answer to questions Rex isn't ready for yet. It's the answer that requires a room and a closed door, and the people who need to hear it all at once. I'll explain everything, he says. Not yet. But before the war ends. I promise you that. Rex holds the eye contact with the flat, measuring assessment of a man running probability calculations on trust. He passes. Barely, but he passes. What's the plan? Rex asks. The plan requires a Kaminoan geneticist, a Republic medical override code that technically belongs to the Chancellor's office, and Ahsoka in a waiting room across the facility, believing she's there for a routine force sensitivity evaluation. The waiting room part troubles him more than the medical override. She's going to know something's happening, he tells Rex. In the transport down to Kamino's cloning facility, rain hammering the viewport and the dense curtains that Kamino's atmosphere produces around the clock. She already does, Rex says. I know. She's not the kind to stay in waiting rooms. I know that too. Rex is quiet for a moment, with the studied neutrality of someone who has an opinion and is evaluating whether the moment calls for it. It calls for it. Sir, with respect, she's better than you're giving her credit for. If she knew the full situation, she's 14. ARC troopers qualify for forward operations at 14. She's not a trooper. Rex agrees. She's a Jedi. And a good one. And she's been watching you run oblique operations for 3 weeks and not saying anything about it because she's decided to trust the process. That's not a child's patience. He looks at the rain on the viewport. The thing Rex doesn't have the full context for is that he knows exactly what Ahsoka can handle. He knows it because he's seen it, lived it, watched her carry things that would have broken most fully trained knights. The protective instinct he's running isn't underestimation. It's the specific structural knowledge that there are certain wounds a person can only avoid if someone removes the cause before it arrives. Not because she can't survive the wound. Because she shouldn't have to. After Kamino, he says. I'll tell her more. Rex accepts this with the nod of a man banking the answer for verification later. The Kaminoan's name is Nala Se. She receives him in a sterile consultation room above the growth chambers, with the careful, attentive composure of a scientist who has learned that Republic military figures tend to arrive with either procurement demands or operational questions, and that efficient service to both categories is the most reliable way to keep the contract intact. He sits across from her and puts a medical data pad on the table between them. The inhibitor chips, he says. I want them removed. Nala Se is still. Those devices are a standard component of clone behavioral. I know what they are, he says. With the same flat precision he used in the equipment bay with Fives, the same precision he uses for all the things that don't benefit from softening. I also know who commissioned them and what they're designed to trigger, and that information is documented, verified, and in a location that isn't on this planet. He pauses. I'm not asking you to shut down the program. I'm asking you to remove the chips from the 501st Legion, quietly, and document it as a routine hardware upgrade. She studies him. Her eyes are the pale, analytical kind that have spent decades assessing variables. The Chancellor's office has standing authorization over the clone armies. Yes, he says. He does. He lets that sit. Nala Se recalculates. The recalculation takes approximately 8 seconds and involves, he suspects, a fairly rapid reassessment of the political geometry of a Jedi general who knows exactly what the Chancellor's standing authorization is designed to do and is in this room anyway. A routine hardware upgrade, she says. Routine, he confirms. They bring Rex and Fives in first. He stays in the facility while it's done, not pacing, not anxious, but present in the way he's been present for everything since Christophsis, with the patient, grounded stillness of a man who knows that the most useful thing he can do while a procedure is running is make himself available for whatever comes after it. Ahsoka finds him in the corridor outside. She has left the waiting room. Of course she has. She stands in the corridor with her arms crossed and her montrals tilted at the active processing angle, and the expression of someone who has assembled most of a picture from available fragments, and is waiting for him to confirm the frame. "You're removing the chips," she says. Not a question. He looks at her. "Yes. From all of them? From the 501st first. Then the rest." She holds his gaze. Something moves through her expression, not surprise, because she's already past surprise, but a reckoning with the scale of what she's been standing in the vicinity of for 3 weeks without being given the full dimensions. "They were going to kill us," she says. "The clones. They were going to—" Yes, the corridor is quiet. Somewhere below, in the growth chambers, the next generation of soldiers is developing in controlled atmospheric columns. She looks at him for a long moment with those blue eyes that process faster than they reveal. Then she uncrosses her arms and stands beside him, facing the same direction, shoulder close to his arm without quite making contact. "Okay," she says. Just that. Okay, he looks straight ahead. The weight of it, the specific weight of a disaster that is not going to happen, of a wound that will not be inflicted, of 150 men who will not one day raise their weapons at the person standing beside him, settles somewhere in his chest and stays there. Not relief, exactly. Something quieter than relief, and more permanent. The alert comes at the 3rd hour of the night cycle, not through official channels, through the Force. He is awake before the sensation fully resolves, already sitting up in the narrow temple bunk, already reaching out through the training bond that exists between Master and Padawan like a thread of light, pulling it taut to find what's on the other end. The thread is there. Ahsoka is there. But the quality of her presence has changed. The warm, fierce signature he's learned to read the way you learn to read weather has compressed into something sharp and cornered and very still. The stillness of someone trying not to be found. He's moving before he's fully dressed. The temple at the 3rd hour has the particular quality of a building breathing slowly. Skeleton crew of knights on night rotation initiates a sleep. The great halls emptied of their daytime purposefulness and left with just the stone and the light strips on their lowest setting, and the occasional droid on a maintenance pass. He moves through it at a pace that covers ground without producing sound, and he is reaching out ahead of himself constantly, mapping what the Force shows him, Ahsoka's compressed signature, 2 floors below his present position, in the lower corridor that connects the Padawan dormitories to the East Garden exit. And near her, closer than they should be, 2 presences that are doing what trained operatives do when they're trying to avoid Force detection. Flattening themselves. Pulling their intention inward. It works on most Jedi, this technique, because most Jedi are sensing for threat signatures actively projected. He doesn't sense for projection. He senses for absence. 2 gaps in the Force, shaped exactly like people who don't want to be sensed. He locates them precisely and adjusts his route. Ahsoka has already engaged by the time he arrives. She hasn't been passive. He didn't expect passive. Has never once in any timeline expected passive from Ahsoka Tano. And the first operative is already against the corridor wall with her lightsaber at his throat, and the controlled ferocity of someone who woke up to danger and converted fear into action in the span of approximately 2 seconds. The second operative is behind her. The second operative has a device that isn't a weapon in the conventional sense, a neural disruptor, compact, Republic military issue, the kind used for non-lethal neutralization of Force sensitives. He knows this device. He knows exactly what it does, and he knows exactly where this particular operative acquired it. And he knows, with the cold specificity of foreknowledge, that non-lethal is a relative term contingent on dosage calibration, and the calibration on this one was not set with Ahsoka's physiology in mind. His hand comes up. The device leaves the operative's grip and travels 12 feet through the corridor air and arrives in his palm with the particular quiet of something that was moving fast and stopped completely. He looks at it, closes his fingers around it, looks at the operative. The operative is a human male, mid-30s, professional stillness, mercenary, not ideological, the body language of someone paid to complete an objective rather than committed to it. He processes the situation for approximately 1 second, makes the calculation that the situation has changed beyond recoverable parameters, and reaches for the secondary weapon at his belt. He crosses the 12 feet between them before the weapon clears the holster. One hand on the operative's wrist, redirecting the draw. The other hand flat against the operative's sternum, and the force comes up through it. Not violent, not the aggressive push of a combatant trying to create distance, but the absolute structural pressure of a wall. The operative hits the corridor's far side and stays there, held against it, feet 6 inches off the floor. Not unconscious. Held, he turns. Ahsoka has her operative secured. Zip cords from her utility belt. Efficient. The technique Rex taught the 501st for prisoner handling in tight quarters. She's breathing hard. Not from exertion. From the particular metabolic afterburn of adrenaline that the body takes minutes to process out, regardless of how quickly the danger resolves. She looks at him. He looks at her. 2 of them, she says. Her voice is steady. I felt the second one when the first one was almost in the doorway. I moved before, I know. He does. He felt her move through the bond, felt the snap of her going from sleep stillness to combat ready in the second before he was fully oriented himself. You did right. The operative on the wall is beginning to understand that struggling against the telekinetic hold is producing no results, and has started the breathing pattern of someone conserving energy for a different kind of effort. He turns back to him and increases the pressure fractionally, not painful but communicative, and the breathing pattern stops. Who sent you? He says. The operative's jaw sets. He has interrogated people in 3 separate decades, and he recognizes the jaw set of someone who is going to require either time or incentive. He has neither, particularly. They're in a temple corridor at the 3rd hour, and the night rotation night is going to pass this way in approximately 4 minutes. He reaches into the Force and finds the operative's surface thoughts the way you find the top layer of a document stack. Not deep, not invasive. Just the topmost available layer of what the mind is currently processing, which in a person under physical and psychological stress tends to be exactly the thing they're most urgently trying not to think about. A face, an intermediary, not the client. A drop location on Coruscant's lower levels. A name. He releases the surface contact, lowers the operative from the wall, not drops. Lowers. A controlled descent that leaves him standing rather than crumpled. Then he looks at him with the flat, complete attention of a man who needs the operative to understand the precise dimensions of his current situation. You're going to leave Coruscant, he says. Tonight, you're going to tell whoever hired you that the target was moved and the contract window is closed. You're going to give them no other information. A pause. If I find you in this city in 6 hours, the conversation will have different parameters. The operative looks at him for a long moment. Then, he looks at Ahsoka, zip cords and one lit lightsaber, and the expression of someone who is recalibrating her threat assessment upward from where she had it before tonight. Then he looks back. He nods once, and leaves. Ahsoka watches the corridor until the operative's footsteps are gone. Then she deactivates her saber and sits down on the floor with her back against the wall, not collapse, not weakness. The deliberate grounding of someone who has learned that the body needs a moment to finish what the mind has already processed. He sits beside her. Same wall. Same angle. The corridor hums with its 3rd hour quiet. Someone hired them to take me, she says. Yes, not to kill me. The disruptor was for capture. He still has it in his hand. He looks at it, then sets it on the floor between them. Leverage, for someone who needed leverage over the Order, or over me specifically. She considers this. He watches her consider it. The systematic way she works through implications, each inference building on the last. The analytical mind that will one day make her one of the finest strategists the rebellion has. Over you specifically, she says. Because of how you reacted on the ramp. He looks at her. People talk, she says, without defensiveness. Just reporting. The 501st talks. There are stories about what you did on Christophsis, the tanks, but also the ramp. Obi-Wan hasn't said anything directly, but the knights who were in the briefing 2 weeks ago have. The way you, she stops. Chooses words with the care of someone who knows the ones she picks will matter. The way you are with me isn't subtle, Sky Guy. The name arrived somewhere in the 3rd week. From her, Not Skywalker, not Sir, not even Anakin yet, but Sky Guy, delivered the first time with the deadpan energy of someone testing whether irreverence is permitted and filing the response carefully. He has never told her to stop. No, he agrees. It isn't. She picks up the disruptor from the floor, examines it with the focused attention of someone cataloging capabilities for future reference. Someone's watching. Someone who thinks hurting me hurts you. Yes. And you know who. He is quiet for the length of time that constitutes honest acknowledgement without confirmation. Sky Guy, she sets the disruptor down and looks at him directly, blue eyes carrying the full weight of an intelligence that is done accepting partial information on this particular subject. I'm not going to keep standing in the middle of something I can't see the edges of. I'm not asking for everything. I'm asking for enough. He looks at her. She is 14 years old, and she has just neutralized a professional operative and zip-corded him in the dark, and she is sitting on a corridor floor at the third hour asking him, with complete calm, for the shape of the threat, so she can face it properly. He thinks about what Rex said in the transport over Kamino's reign. She's better than you're giving her credit for. There's someone on Coruscant, he says, who has been engineering this war from both sides. Someone with access to the highest levels of the Republic. Someone who has been specifically interested in you and in me and in the relationship between us since before you arrived on Christophsis. She takes this in without visible disruption. The Chancellor, she says. He goes very still. She reads his stillness with the accuracy of someone who has spent months learning his registers. I don't know how I know, she says. When I run the logic of who benefits from leverage over you, there's only one person at the top of that structure. He looks at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, you were always going to figure it out. She absorbs this, the Montrose angle forward, the active processing angle, and she sits with the information the way she sits with Ataru corrections, not rushing to the next thing, letting the current thing fully arrive. Okay, she says, finally. The same word as Kamino. The same complete, unadorned acceptance of a reality that is what it is. The same willingness to stand inside the truth of it, rather than at a comfortable distance. He holds her then, not planned, not calculated, just the response of a man whose body remembers losing her, and understands. In the part of him that operates below strategy and below language, that she is here and whole, and that this is worth something no amount of tactical precision can fully express. She lets him. After a moment, she holds back. They stay like that for the length of time the moment requires. Then he pulls back, looks at her face, and the apology starts forming, for not being fast enough, for the disruptor that came within reach of her, for the whole architecture of danger that keeps finding her no matter which version of the timeline they're standing in. Don't, she says. Quiet, certain, I'm okay. You got here. He stops. Nods. There are people who need to hear this at the same time, he says. And you deserve to be in that room. She studies him for a moment with the full, undeflectable focus of someone who has decided that soon is acceptable but has noted the exact parameters of the promise. Okay, she says, for the third time. They sit in the quiet corridor together until the night rotation night passes, sees them, decides this particular situation is above his pay grade, and continues on his route without comment. The third hour deepens toward the fourth. Outside the temple, Coruscant keeps its own council. Padmé's apartment has a balcony that faces east. At the sixth hour, when the Coruscant sky does the thing it occasionally does between the upper and lower atmospheric layers, catches the refracted light of a sun that won't fully clear the horizon for another 40 minutes and produces, briefly, a color that has no precise name, something between amber and gray and the specific shade of a thing that is almost but not quite finished becoming itself. The balcony is the best place in the building to watch it happen. He chose the sixth hour deliberately. Padmé's already awake, already moving through the apartment with the contained purposefulness of someone for whom stillness is a discipline rather than a default. She opens the door and reads his face in the half-second between the door opening and any word being spoken, the way she has always read him, completely, accurately, and without making a performance of it. Everyone's coming, she says. Not a question. If you'll have us. She steps back from the door. Obi-Wan arrives first. Because Obi-Wan is always early and the earliness is a form of communication, it says, "I have been thinking about this since you called, and I have questions that could not wait comfortably until the agreed hour." He comes in with the particular quality of composed attention that means he has organized his concerns into a priority stack and is prepared to work through them systematically. He doesn't get the chance yet. Ahsoka arrives 4 minutes later, still pulling her outer robe straight, with the expression of someone who has been awake since the 3rd hour for unrelated reasons, and has decided that running on no sleep is a purely mechanical problem with purely mechanical solutions. She takes in the room, takes in Obi-Wan, takes in the configuration of available seating, and chooses the position that gives her sightlines to all 3 entry points. He notices. He always notices. Padmé brings tea that nobody asked for and everybody takes. Because Padmé has the particular social intelligence that understands hot objects in hand give people something to do with their bodies while their minds are occupied with more difficult things. He stands at the center of the room and does not sit down. "I need to tell you something," he says. "All 3 of you, at the same time. And I need you to let me finish before anyone speaks, because the middle of it is going to produce questions that the end of it answers." A silence that is the silence of 3 people deciding simultaneously to grant the same request. He begins. He starts with Endor. Not Christophsis, not the Christophsis divergence, not the mechanics of how he arrived. He starts with the fire, and the superstructure, and Luke's voice. Because the where it began of this story is not 19 years old on a muddy battlefield. It is 45 years old and dying. And if they are going to understand anything that comes after, they need to understand that first. He describes Luke the way you describe something you can only see clearly once you've lost it. The boy's certainty. The refusal to accept the version of events that everyone else had already accepted. The specific, impossible stubbornness of a child who looked at Darth Vader and said, "My father is in there," and meant it literally, and was right. He describes what he was, Vader, completely, without softening the architecture of it, the things he did, the things he was commanded to do and did willingly, the things he originated, the particular depth of the compliance. He watches their faces while he speaks, and he speaks to all 3 equally, turning so no one receives the account secondhand, so no one is protected from any of it by the angle of his body. Obi-Wan goes very still approximately 4 minutes in. The stillness of a man encountering the answer to a question he has been not quite asking for months, and finding the answer both worse and more complete than the version he'd constructed. Padmé's hand tightens on the teacup. Once, then releases. Her face is the face of someone receiving devastating information and choosing, actively and continuously, to keep receiving it rather than look away. Ahsoka watches him with the fixed, unblinking attention of someone building a complete picture and refusing to flinch at any component of it. He describes the suit, the mask, the breathing, the way the Empire administered itself through fear that he was the instrument of. He describes Order 66, what it was, what it did, what he did after it, the temple, the specific terrible efficiency of that night. He watches the moment it lands on Ahsoka, the moment she processes that the clones, her clones, Rex's men, the 501st, were part of it, were used as the instrument of it. And he watches her absorb this and hold it, and not collapse under it. He describes Padmé's death, and he does not look at Padmé while he does. He keeps his voice level. The facts are what they are. She died on Polis Massa, and the cause of it was him, was the thing he had become, was the wound he inflicted on her that her body decided it could not outlast. He says this without flinching, because she deserves the truth of it said clearly, not packaged in mitigating language. He describes the years, 2 decades of it. The particular texture of being the thing he was, not self-pity, not performance of remorse, just the flat reporting of a man who is not asking for absolution and is not constructing a case for sympathy, simply completing the account so there are no gaps in it. Then Luke again. The second Death Star. The throne room. The moment he understood that the boy would rather die than become what he had become, and that this understanding was the thing that moved his arm. The fire. The mask coming off. You already have. He stops. The apartment holds the silence for a long time. Then Obi-Wan says, quietly, with the careful, measured weight of a man placing each word like something that might bear significant pressure. I always wondered why you started fighting like a stranger. He looks at him. From Christophsis, Obi-Wan says. The blade. The economy of it. The way you stopped extending. A pause. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself 11 years of training had finally caught up with the instinct. The blue eyes are steady and very sad, and underneath the sadness is something that is not quite relief, but is adjacent to it. The particular sensation of a man who has been carrying the wrong explanation for a long time and is setting it down. It wasn't maturity. No, he says. It wasn't. Padmé sets her tea down. The small sound of it on the table is the only sound in the room for a moment. The Force didn't send you back to relive your worst mistake, she says. Her voice is what it always is when she has found the center of something. Clear, direct, without ornamentation. It sent you back to prove you're more than it. He looks at her. She holds his gaze with the fierce, grief-soaked love of a woman who has just been told she dies, and has decided that this information changes nothing about the present tense. He doesn't have words for this. He has never had words for Padmé when she is being exactly herself. Ahsoka has not spoken yet. He turns to her last. She is looking at the floor, not collapsed into it, not retreating. Processing. The deep, structural processing of someone integrating information that rewrites significant portions of the existing model. Her montrals are angled down, which he has learned means the processing is happening faster than she wants it to, more than she can fully modulate. He waits. She looks up. On Malachor, she says. The name of a place she has never been yet. A place that exists in a future that won't happen now. A battle between two people wearing each other's old faces in a ruined temple. Her voice is completely steady. You said, he said, then you will die. Yes, that wasn't you, she says. Not consolation. Determination. The precise kind that comes from someone who has examined the evidence and arrived at a conclusion and is stating it as fact rather than offering it as comfort. Not really. Or, it was, but it isn't anymore. She closes the distance between them in 3 steps and wraps her arms around him, and her head comes up to his shoulder, and she holds on with the specific, complete force of someone making a structural decision with their body. You're right here, she says into his shoulder. He closes his eyes. His arms come up, and he holds her back. And the thing that lives in his chest, the weight that has been there since Endor, since Luke's face, since the fire, the particular permanent weight of a man who spent 2 decades as the thing he most feared becoming, shifts, doesn't leave. But shifts, redistributes, becomes something the body can carry differently. Obi-Wan crosses the room and puts a hand on his shoulder. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. The hand says the thing that Obi-Wan, in all the years of their knowing each other, never quite managed to say with words. I'm here. I'm still here. The thing between us is not broken. Padmé comes to the other side and she takes his hand and holds it, and her grip is the grip of a woman who is alive and intends to remain so, and is communicating this intention through her fingers. They stay like this. The 6th hour light moves across the balcony, amber and gray, the unnamed color of things almost finished becoming themselves. Then Padmé pulls back and looks at all of them in turn with the expression she uses when the emotional work is done and the political work begins, the expression that means she has already begun to build the next thing. Palpatine, she says. Palpatine, he confirms. Together, Obi-Wan says. Not a question. Not even an agreement. A structural fact about the shape of what comes next. Ahsoka pulls back and looks up at him. The processing has settled into something that looks, underneath everything, like the specific kind of peace that comes from things finally being exactly as large as they actually are. No larger, no smaller, no longer hidden in the space between what is said and what is true. Tell us the plan, she says. He looks at the 4 of them in the 6th hour light. For the first time since a dying man heard his son's voice on the Death Star and understood that it wasn't too late, For the first time since a consciousness slammed back into a young body on a muddy battlefield and found, impossibly, a second chance sitting at the end of a shuttle ramp, the plan is not his alone. It never should have been. "All right," he says. He begins. They go at midnight. Not because midnight carries symbolic weight. He has lived long enough past symbolism to find it mostly decorative, but because the Chancellor's office security rotation has a 4-minute gap at the turn of the midnight hour. A structural vulnerability in the coverage pattern that was engineered into the original installation by a man who needed a private entrance and never imagined someone would. Use it as an exit route for him. He knows, because he engineered it. Mace Windu walks beside him through the Senate building's maintenance corridor, with the particular silence of a man who has spent 3 days reviewing evidence and arrived at a state beyond surprise. Past the shock of the revelation and through it, into the cold, resolute territory on the other side. Mace processes betrayal the way he processes everything, thoroughly, without sentimentality, and with the systematic fury of someone who converts outrage directly into precision. Obi-Wan is on his other side. He hasn't spoken since they left the speeder. Behind them, at the distance they agreed on, close enough to maintain the bond, far enough to be outside the office's immediate sensor radius. Ahsoka moves through the corridor's shadow, with the particular quality of presence that Ataru training produces in someone with her native spatial intelligence. He can feel her through the bond, steady, controlled, the warm, fierce signature carrying, underneath its surface, the specific kind of alertness that knows it is waiting for something specific, and has already decided what it will do when the specific thing arrives. He told her at the apartment, "Stay back unless I call you in." She said, "Define unless." He said, "You'll know." She accepted this with the expression of someone who has filed the ambiguity as a known variable and will manage it accordingly. The office door is unlocked. This is the first tell. The maintenance corridor access should require a security override that even a Republic General's clearance doesn't automatically provide. And the door is unlocked. And Palpatine's security detail is not at its post. And the outer office is empty in the way that a space is empty when it has been deliberately emptied rather than naturally vacated. Mace stops. Reads the room. His jaw sets. "He knows we're coming," Mace says. "Yes," he says. "You knew he'd know." He has force precognition that operates approximately 6 hours ahead of the present. He's known since before we made the decision. He keeps his voice level. It doesn't change the geometry. He knows we're coming, and he's still here, which means he's decided he can handle what's coming. He's wrong, but he won't know that yet. Mace looks at him for a moment with the assessing attention of a man recalibrating trust in real time. Then he nods, once, and they move. Palpatine is standing at the viewport, not seated behind his desk in the configuration of authority, not arranged in the careful staging of a man receiving petitioners, standing at the curved viewport with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at Coruscant's midnight illumination, and the posture is the posture of a man who has decided that the best move is to appear to have already won whatever is about to happen. He knows this posture. He has stood in rooms where this posture was being performed and believed it implicitly, for years, because the man performing it had calibrated it specifically for him. He doesn't believe it now. "I wondered," Palpatine says, without turning, "which of you would lead them in?" His voice is still the Chancellor's voice. Warm, sorrowful, the register of a man betrayed by those he loved. The instrument is perfect. He has never stopped marveling, even now, even knowing everything, at the sheer technical mastery of it. "Chancellor," Mace says, "formal, final. You are under arrest for conspiracy against the Republic, for the murder of." Palpatine turns. The face he turns with is not the Chancellor's face. It's Sidious's face, the one underneath the mask, the ancient, patient, contemptuous face that has been running calculations on the galaxy for decades, and it is wearing an expression that he has seen once before, in a different life, in this same room, the expression of a man who has decided that the performance is over and what comes next is simply conclusion. "Arrest," Sidious says, and the warmth is completely gone, and what's left is the voice from the bottom of the thing, The voice that was there before the Chancellor persona was constructed. The voice of something that has been alive and accumulating power since before any of them were born. "You bring 3 Jedi to arrest me. We brought evidence," Obi-Wan says. Steady, the Senate will. The lightning comes from both hands simultaneously. He was expecting it. He steps in front of Obi-Wan and Mace, and his hands come up, and the Force comes up through them, and the arc meets the barrier he constructs at the midpoint between Sidious and the 3 of them, and spreads across it like water hitting glass, dissipating into the floor in crackling tributaries that scorch the marble. The effort of it runs up his arms and into his shoulders, and he stays standing. Sidious watches this with the first expression that isn't performed. Genuine. If brief. Recalibration. The barrier is not what he expected. He expected Anakin to dodge, to deflect with a blade, to do the reactive thing that Anakin always did. The barrier is a technique that requires sustained force contact with an active lightning stream, requires staying inside it rather than stepping aside, requires a tolerance for the cost of it that Anakin Skywalker at 19 should not yet have developed. The recalibration lasts approximately 2 seconds. Then, Sidious redirects. The lightning angles left, around the barrier's edge, seeking the path of least resistance toward the door where Mace is already moving. Mace catches it on Vapad. The form that turns an opponent's darkness back on them, the only lightsaber form that can genuinely channel Force lightning without the blade being overwhelmed by it, and Mace Windu is the only living master of it. And Sidious knows this, has always known this, which is why he engineered Anakin's interference in this room in the original timeline, because without it, Mace wins. Mace is winning. The lightning folds back toward its source, and Sidious absorbs it, and it costs him. Actually, costs him. The ancient face showing the physical toll of sustained output being returned. The calculations running faster now behind those yellow eyes as the board state keeps refusing to resolve the way it should. "Anakin," Sidious says. Still that voice. Still the instrument, even now. The personal address. The singular focus. The thread he has been pulling for years toward the specific wound it's attached to. "You know what they are. The Jedi. You know what they've done to you." To her, he is moving while Sidious speaks, closing the distance from the left while Mace holds the center, and he is completely quiet while he moves. No response to the address, no engagement with the instrument. Because the instrument requires a wound to find purchase in. And the wound it's reaching for has changed. He doesn't love Ahsoka the way Palpatine designed him to love her. Desperate. Secret. Fear-soaked. The love that whispers, "I will do anything to keep you safe," and means it in the way that means including unconscionable things. He loves her the way a man loves something he has already lost and found again, which is openly, and without the existential terror that terror requires to function as leverage. Palpatine has no instrument calibrated for that. He reaches Sidious at the moment Mace's Va-Pad pressure crests, and Sidious makes the decision that desperation produces, the same decision he made in a different life, but aimed differently now. The lightning redirects a final time, away from Mace, around the barrier, toward the door. Toward Ahsoka. He feels it through the bond before it arrives. The sudden change in her presence from steady alertness to the sharp compression of someone who has just become a target. He moves between the arc and the door in the same instant she moves back from it, and the lightning hits him across both hands, both forearms, and he catches it. Actually, catches it. Contains it. The force absorption technique that he spent 6 weeks quietly practicing in the temple's lower training rooms at hours when no one was observing, because he knew this moment was coming, and he knew what it would require. It costs him. His hands are burning. The cost runs up his arms and into his chest, and he stays on his feet through the specific effort of a man who has decided the floor is not an option. He looks at Sidious across the charged air between them. Sidious looks back at him. The yellow eyes are running calculations that keep returning null results. The board state has no historical precedent. An Anakin Skywalker who steps into Force lightning on behalf of a Padawan without breaking, without the desperation cracking open into something exploitable, who stands inside the cost of love without that cost becoming a weapon pointed inward. This is not a configuration the calculations were built to handle. He closes the distance. His saber comes up, one hand the right, which is steadier than the left. The blade is blue and quiet, and it moves in the flat, unhurried arc of a man who is not fighting with anger, and is not fighting with grief, and is not fighting with the specific fuel Palpatine spent decades engineering into him. He stops it at Sidious's throat. Sidious is still, for the first time in the encounter, completely still. The calculation has resolved to a single remaining variable, and the variable is whether the man holding the blade can be made to hesitate. He looks at Sidious, at the face underneath the face, at the thing that has been pulling strings in the dark for decades, that engineered his mother's death, and his marriage's secrecy, and his Padawan's future wounds, and the deaths of every child in the Jedi Temple, that looked at the best parts of him, and calculated, patiently, exactly how to make them into the worst parts. "You don't get my fear anymore," he says, quiet, level, the voice of a man delivering a fact rather than a verdict. "You don't get any of us." The blade completes its arc. The silence afterward is the silence of a room in which something very large and very old has stopped. Obi-Wan crosses to him first. His hands find his arms, both of them, the burned forearms, and the grip is careful and firm, and the eyes above it are wet, in the way that Obi-Wan's eyes are very rarely wet, and he doesn't say anything, just holds on. Mace deactivates his blade. He looks at the viewport for a moment, at the midnight city beyond it, and the expression on his face is not triumph. It is the expression of a man standing in the aftermath of a structural collapse he has been watching approach for years, finally processing that the collapse has occurred, and he is still standing. Ahsoka comes through the door. She crosses the room without pausing, without looking at what's on the floor, and she reaches him and wraps her arms around him from the side, her head against his shoulder, and he feels through the bond the specific quality of her relief, not theatrical, not performed. The simple, structural fact of someone who loves a person and has just confirmed that the person is still present. He holds her back with one arm, the other arm Obi-Wan still has. Mace comes to his other side and puts a hand on his shoulder. The four of them stand in the dark office above the midnight city. He lets his eyes close. The weight in his chest, the 23-year weight, the Vader weight, the specific gravity of a man who became the worst version of himself and had to live inside it for decades, is not gone. It doesn't vanish. It simply sits differently now, in a body that is standing in a room where the architect of all of it is no longer running calculations, and the people he came back to protect are alive, and here, and holding on. He breathes. Unhurried, unmodulated. His own. The Separatist droid army stops fighting on a Tuesday. Not because of a dramatic final battle, not because of a climactic confrontation between opposing generals. It stops because the man running both sides of the war from a Senate office on Coruscant is no longer running anything, and without the sustained intelligence directing the Separatist High Command's strategic decisions. The Confederate leadership discovers almost immediately that they have been fighting a war whose objectives were never actually theirs. The ceasefire negotiations take 11 days. Padmé leads the Republic delegation. She does not require assistance. He watches her work from the observation gallery above the Senate chamber on the third day, and feels something he has no precise name for. Pride is too small. Relief is too simple. It is closer to the sensation of watching something that was always true finally become visible. The war ends without ceremony. He doesn't attend the official closing session. He is in the temple's lower courtyard with Ahsoka, working through the upper sequences of Jarkai form that she has been developing over the past several months. And he decides that the courtyard is exactly where he should be, and the Senate gallery is not. She lands a combination he's been working with her on for 3 weeks. The transition from the high guard into the lateral sweep, the point where her natural momentum used to carry her past the optimal position, now resolved into something fluid and controlled, and entirely her own. She knows she got it. He can tell by the way she doesn't look at him for confirmation. That's it, he says anyway. She deactivates both blades and stands breathing for a moment, head tilted back, eyes closed, in the posture of someone letting the body register what the mind has already processed. I know, she says. The council meeting happens without him. He is informed of this. Master Plo Koon sends a calm that is respectful and slightly uncomfortable, the register of a Jedi who is navigating the novel situation of a council that has spent 3 days discussing what it should have been doing differently, and has arrived at conclusions that are both overdue and insufficient. The council, humbled in the specific way that institutions are humbled when they discover they nearly destroyed themselves through their own rigidity, and were saved by the thing they prohibited: attachment, love, the specific bonds between people who chose each other, has begun a reform process. He reads the summary Plo Koon sends. The language is careful, institutional. It uses words like recalibration and adaptive framework and expanded understanding of emotional support structures. It is, in the way of all institutional reform, a document written by people who understand that something was wrong without yet fully understanding the shape of the thing they're fixing. It is a beginning. He sends a reply thanking Plo Koon for the update. Then he goes back to the courtyard. Ahsoka leaves the Order on a morning in early spring. Not because anyone has wronged her. Not because a friend has betrayed her. Not because a council has failed her. Not because the weight of a war and a false accusation and a public humiliation have made the walls feel like they're closing in. She leaves because she has been offered something specific and has decided, clearly and without anguish, that she wants it. She tells him the night before. They are sitting on the temple roof, a habit they've developed over the past months, the high vantage point and the Coruscant skyline, and the particular quality of a conversation that happens above the city, feeling more true than conversations at ground level. "I'm not leaving because I'm angry," she says. "I need you to know that." "I know. I'm leaving because Padm's legislative work needs someone who can operate outside Jedi jurisdiction, and because the Reform Commission needs someone who was inside the Order and chose to be outside it, for reasons that aren't failure." She is looking at the skyline, the practiced analytical directness she brings to everything. "And because I want to. I want to see what I am when the Jedi aren't the frame I'm standing inside." He nods. "Are you going to tell me not to?" she asks. "No." She looks at him. "Okay, a pause. Are you going to be weird about it?" "Probably," he says. Internally she laughs. The sound of it in the night air above the city is the sound of something uncomplicated, which is rarer and more valuable than most things that get called rare and valuable. "I'm not going anywhere that matters," she says. "I'll be at Padm's 3 nights a week." "I know. And you'll know where I am through the bond." "I know that too." She leans her shoulder against his arm, the comfortable, territorial ease of someone who has decided proximity is her right, and has never been told otherwise. They stay like that for a while, watching the city's light patterns shift with the hour. "Sky Guy," she says. "Snips, thank you." Simple, direct, no elaboration, because she is Ahsoka and she doesn't elaborate when the essential thing has already been said. He doesn't say you don't need to thank me. He doesn't deflect it or diminish it. He lets it land where it lands. "You're welcome," he says. He resigns his Jedi commission on a Thursday. The letter to the council is 3 paragraphs. It is respectful and final and does not apologize for itself. Mace reads it, according to Obi-Wan, twice. The second time with an expression that Obi-Wan describes as complicated appreciation, which is the most Mace Windu will ever publicly produce in the direction of an emotional decision. Obi-Wan himself sits across from him in the temple's small inner garden the day after the letter is sent, with 2 cups of tea and the expression of a man who has processed the full dimensions of the past year and arrived somewhere he didn't expect. "You're really leaving," Obi-Wan says. "I'm really leaving. To be a father. To be a father. To be a husband. To be present for things I missed the first time." Obi-Wan is quiet for a moment. The garden's fountain moves over its shaped stone. "The first time," he repeats, carefully. "The first time," he confirms. Obi-Wan nods slowly. He picks up his tea. He looks at the fountain with the expression of a man standing inside a truth that is both enormous and somehow exactly the right size for the space it's occupying. "I'm going to miss fighting beside you," Obi-Wan says. "You'll find someone else to worry about." "Undoubtedly." A pause. "It won't be the same." "No," he agrees. "It won't." They drink their tea in the garden in the particular comfortable silence of two people who have been through enough together that silence between them is not empty. Naboo in the summer is a specific kind of beautiful that requires no distance to sustain itself. The house is small by Naboo standards, a converted lake cottage that Padmé's family has owned for 3 generations. Stone walls and wide windows and a porch that faces south toward the water. The garden is wild in the deliberate way of a garden that has been tended just enough to be safe and left alone enough to be interesting. The lake in the morning catches the light and distributes it across the ceiling of the main room in shifting patterns that Luke, at 2.5 years old, finds inexhaustibly fascinating. Leia finds them beneath her notice. Leia is currently focused on the practical problem of convincing a fruit to move using only her mind, which she has decided is possible because she watched Ahsoka demonstrate it once and has concluded that anything Ahsoka can do is achievable by Leia Skywalker through the application of sufficient determination. The fruit has not moved yet. Leia has not stopped trying. Ahsoka sits cross-legged on the grass with Luke in her lap, guiding his hands through the small, precise gesture that encourages the Force to respond to intention rather than effort, the difference between pushing and allowing, which is the first thing and the hardest thing in the thing that Luke, with his father's raw sensitivity and his mother's intuitive precision, is beginning to understand in the wordless way that very young children understand things before language arrives to complicate them. A second fruit lifts off the grass. Luke's face produces the expression of someone who has just confirmed a personal theory about the nature of reality. Ahsoka steadies the fruit at eye level and then, very gently, lets it complete its arc back to the ground. Again, Luke says. Again. Ahsoka agrees. He watches from the porch. He is holding a cup of something warm that Padmé made before she left for the morning's work at the small desk she keeps in the back room. The Reform Commission correspondence doesn't stop, because they've moved to Naboo. It simply follows her, which is something he accepted as a feature of loving Padmé Amidala before he finished understanding what loving Padmé Amidala entailed. He watches Ahsoka with his children in the summer garden. The weight in his chest is still there. It is always there. He has stopped expecting it to leave and started understanding it as the appropriate texture of a life that has held the things his life has held. Not a wound, not a malfunction, just the specific gravity of a man who knows exactly how much this cost and chooses, every morning, to be here anyway. The lake catches the light. Leia's fruit moves, finally, 1 inch to the left, and she looks up at the sky with the expression of someone who has just confirmed what she already knew. Luke laughs. He closes his eyes. He had been given back every mistake, and this time he didn't let a single one of them win. The bird song continues. The lake moves. The porch holds. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.